You were told that if you studied hard, got good grades, and followed the rules, everything would work out. But here's the truth most people never hear. School was never designed for the world you live in now. It trained us to memorize, obey, and perform, not to question, create, or adapt. I'm Dr. Yu-Ling, an education professor, and today we're going to uncover how the education system failed us and what we can do to fix it. Here's a secret most people never learn in school. The classroom you sat in today was designed for a world that disappeared more than a century ago. In the mid-1800s, the world was changing fast. Steam, steel, and new machines demanded armies of reliable workers. Industrialists and politicians began asking a simple question: how do we train millions of children to show up on time, follow instructions, and do repetitive work without complaining? The answer became the public school model we still recognize today. Bells signaled when to start and stop, just like factory whistles. Desks in rows kept bodies still and attention forward. Standardized tests measured how well you could repeat, not how deeply you could think. The goal wasn't imagination, it was efficiency. The mission wasn't discovery, it was discipline. And the system worked for the 19th century economy. It produced punctual workers, clerks, and soldiers who could follow directions and read instruction manuals. But here's the problem. While everything else evolved, industry, technology, the global economy, our schools stayed frozen in that original mold. Today's students are still sorted by age instead of ability, still moved on a bell schedule, still treated as products moving through a line. We keep saying education should prepare kids for the real world, but it is preparing them for a world that no longer exists. And that outdated design didn't just shape how we sit in classrooms, it shaped how we think about worth. Because the factory model didn't end with bells and desks, it taught us to believe that our value could be measured in numbers. If the factory system taught students to obey, the next innovation taught them to compete. In the early 20th century, educators searched for a way to measure the output of every child. They borrowed another idea from industry, the quality control score. So letters and percentages became the new assembly line stamp of approval. The goal was consistency, an objective signal of progress. But somewhere along the way, grades stopped being feedback, they became identity. The psychologist Albert Bandura called it self-efficacy, the belief that you can grow through effort. But a red mark rewires that belief. I am this score. So over time, students stop asking, how can I improve? And start asking, what do you want from me? Carol Dweck's research on mindset proves it. Praise for talent builds fear of failure. Praise for effort builds resilience. Yet our system still celebrates the flawless transcript over the curious mind. The result? We built a culture where perfection feels safer than progress. Every test, every ranking, every honor roll whispers the same lie. Your worth is a number. But here's the irony. The very thing that makes you a great learner, the struggle, is what grades punish most. And science now shows that struggle isn't weakness at all, it's how the brain grows. Think back to final exam week. You crammed until midnight, highlighted every line, whispered facts under your breath, and yet 1 week later, it was gone. You probably blamed yourself for forgetting, but it wasn't your fault, it was the method. The school system confused memorization with learning. It rewarded short-term recall, the kind that evaporates the moment the test is over. When I review hundreds of studies on learning strategies, a conclusion is clear. The techniques most students use, such as rereading, highlighting, and cramming, it barely moves the needle for long-term memory. The real secret lies in retrieval practice and spacing. Retrieval is testing yourself instead of rereading. It forces your brain to reconstruct knowledge from scratch. Spacing reviews the same idea across days or weeks and builds durable neural pathways that resist forgetting. In other words, the struggle to remember is what actually makes remembering possible. Yet our system treats forgetting as failure. It rushes through units, it piles on deadlines, moves on before real learning has time to take root. And that's the lie we were all taught. that speed means intelligence and stillness means falling behind. But what if forgetting isn't a flaw at all? What if it's the brain's way of making space for deeper understanding? Because every time you struggle to recall, you're not failing, you're rewiring your mind to remember longer. Every classroom tells two stories. The one we see, rows of students learning together, and the one we don't, who's being left out. Behind the myth of equal education lies a design built for sameness. The factory model rewarded those who could sit still, read fast, and follow directions. Everyone else, those who learn more through movement, or story, or silence, they were labeled slow, disruptive, or different. By the mid-20th century, schools began creating separate tracks for students with disabilities, language barriers, or behavioral differences. The intention was support, but the effect was segregation. And that separation still echoes today. Whether through streaming, labeling, or quiet bias, too many learners still hear the same message. You don't belong in this classroom. But inclusion isn't about placing students in the same room. It's about changing the room itself. It's about designing lessons, spaces, and technologies that expect diversity rather than accommodate it. That's the heart of Universal Design for Learning, UDL. It asks one radical question. What if we built education around human variety instead of around the average student who doesn't actually exist? When we plan for difference from the start, everyone learns better, not just those once called exceptions. Accessibility isn't a ramp added later, it's the blueprint from day one. But inclusion is more than access, it's about voice. Because when students finally enter the room, we still rarely hear them speak. And that silence, not disability, not difference, is the system's greatest failure. When children start school, they ask hundreds of questions a day. Why is the sky blue? Where does the sun go at night? Can dogs dream? But by the time they reach high school, most have stopped asking altogether. What happened? Curiosity didn't vanish, it was trained out of them. The factory model valued silence, efficiency, and right answers. Questions slowed production, so we learned early to keep our head down, finish the worksheet, don't look foolish. Over time, curiosity became confusion we hid, rather than courage we shared. Students learned the safest way to survive school was to stop wondering aloud. Yet psychologists like Lev Vygotsky showed that learning itself is social. It grows through talk, collaboration, and feedback. Meaning isn't found in isolation, it's built between voices. That's why some of the most powerful learning moments don't come from lectures or tests, they come from conversation. In my own class, I've seen it happen. When students create podcasts instead of essays, they start thinking out loud. Their uncertainty becomes dialogue. Their dialogue becomes discovery. They're not performing for a grade anymore, they're connecting for meaning. Curiosity isn't childish, it's the engine of intellect. And when schools silence it, they silence the very thing that makes learning human. Maybe the future of education isn't about more screens, apps, or data points. Maybe it's about something ancient, the simple act of asking and listening. Because when we rediscover the courage to wonder together, curiosity comes back to life. After everything we've uncovered, the factory blueprint, the grades, the silence, the lost curiosity, the question is simple: can we fix this? The truth is, we already know how. Because great teachers have been rebuilding the system from the inside out, quietly, every day. The fix doesn't start with new rules or policies, it starts with 4 small revolutions. First, we need to redefine what success even means. Grades tell us who can follow directions. Feedback tells us who's learning to think. When assessment becomes conversation instead of judgment, growth finally counts more than perfection. Because education isn't about sorting talent, it's about cultivating it. Second, we teach students how to learn. Retrieval practice, spacing, reflection. These aren't study hacks, they're the science of memory itself. When learners understand how their brains work, they don't just pass tests, they change how they think. Imagine a school where understanding the mind was part of the curriculum, not an accident. Third, we designed for difference from the start. Universal design for learning isn't just about making things easier, it's about making learning possible for more people. Choice, accessibility, multiple ways to show mastery. This is how classrooms become communities. When we build for the margins, everyone moves forward. And finally, we bring back relationships. Because no algorithm, AI, or test will ever replace the power of a teacher who sees a student. Learning begins with trust, growth begins with belonging, and both begin with people. The education system may have failed us, but it doesn't have to fail the next generation. Every teacher who experiments, every student who dares to ask why, every parent who listens instead of lectures is already rebuilding what school forgot. Education isn't a building, it's a relationship. And if we can reimagine that relationship, we can rebuild everything else. If you believe education can be better, subscribe. Because here we're not just talking about learning, we're rethinking it.